Chairman. My name is Jason Kramer, and I'll be presenting the analysis for the State Retirement Agency. The Retirement Agency, at the direction of the Board of Trustees, has primary responsibility over the state's retirement systems. As you can see here on the first page of the analysis, the fiscal 2024 allowance is $54.2 million, an increase of nearly 12% from fiscal 2023. The agency is funded through an administrative charge on all employers for whom the agency administers retirement benefits. State agencies account for roughly a third of SRA's budgeted funding, which is represented by reimbursable funds on this chart, while local school boards and governmental units make up the rest of the budgeted funding, represented by special funds. The investment division is non-budgeted and makes up about 40% of the allowance and represents most of the increase in fiscal 2024 spending. Turning next to page 4, Exhibit 1 on page 4 shows membership in the state's retirement system by active employees and retirees. Active membership has been flat since fiscal 2012, while retirees have increased, accounting for about 47% of plan participation. The flattening out of active participation means that there's less payroll supporting retiree benefits, which results in the need for higher employer contributions. Exhibit 2 on page 5 shows the share of members in the plan's pre- and post-reforms of 2011. For the first time in fiscal 2022, there are more members in the reform plan than in the pre-reform plan. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows SRA's call center wait times. The agency has struggled for several years to meet wait time and dropped call goals in its call center. SRA attributes the issue primarily to staffing shortages. To that end, the allowance includes 4 new positions for the call center, 3 benefits specialists, and an administrative specialist, which will add to the call center's capacity. Exhibit 4 on page 7 shows the fiscal 2024 allowance. Budget consists of 2 components, the investment division and SRA's overall operations. The overall operations represent 60% of the allowance, with personnel the largest component of those costs. Exhibit 5 on page 8 compares the fiscal 2024 allowance to the fiscal 2023 working appropriation. Within the administration division, cost increases are due primarily to personnel costs, including the addition of 5 positions. There are the 5 that were previously mentioned, the 4 that were previously mentioned, plus a new program manager to take on responsibility of the MPAS 3 IT project, which is nearing completion. Data storage costs related to that project increased by $347,000 as the agency transitions away from paper and sees data needs increase due to in-house portfolio management. Those increases are offset by a $181,000 decrease in contractual costs related to the IT project, which is nearing completion. The non-budgeted investment division is where most of the agency's budget increase occurs. Regular earnings and fringe benefit costs increased by $2.5 million, which is offset by a decrease in bonuses and other compensation. The large increases are due to the division's salary setting authority. The agency anticipated 10% annual salary growth for several years after the division was moved off budget to better align salaries with the market. In addition, the division adds 6 new positions at a cost of about $750,000 in fiscal 2024. That would bring the division to 47 positions, up from 26 in fiscal 2020. Issue number 1 on page 11 is about the system's performance. Exhibit 6 shows the state's investment performance in fiscal 2022 by asset allocation. Total fund performance was minus 2.97%. And system assets totaled $64.6 billion at the close of the fiscal year. Exhibit 7 on page 12 compares the system's performance to benchmarks. And as I noted, while the system did experience a loss, it outperformed benchmarks by half a percentage point. Exhibit 8 on page 13, another useful comparison for the system is shown here in Exhibit 8. This shows the system's TUX rankings, or the Wilshire Trust Universe Comparison Service. The system performed in the top 37% of comparable systems for both 1-year and 3-year returns. Exhibit 10 on page 15 shows the system's funding levels since 2006. The system closed fiscal 2022 with a 76.6% funded ratio and is now projected to hit the 80% funded level by fiscal 2027, which is 2 years later than was projected last year, primarily due to the poor fiscal 2022 returns. The final issue I'll discuss is the system's amortization policies on page 16. As part of the pension reforms of 2013, the system's assets and liabilities are at that time were amortized over a single closed 25-year amortization period. This eliminated a projected spike in contributions at that time, but it was understood that the risk of volatility in contribution levels would return as the period neared its end. The agency created a group to review the policy and provide recommendations, and the board focused on the two options shown here in Exhibit 11. Option 1 generally reflects the best practices as described by the Conference of Consulting Actuaries. Option 2 mostly reflects best practices with the exception of the treatment of gains and losses. The board recommended option 2, which has a 15-year pooled rolling period as opposed to 15-year layered closed periods. The pooled period means the amortization period is reset every year, while the layered closed period means that a new layer is added every year. The concern with the rolling period is that the system doesn't approach full funding, while the concern with the layered closed period is that it has the potential to introduce contribution volatility. At the Joint Pension Committee meeting during the interim, the committee voted to recommend the closed layered amortization policy, while also allowing for active management of the layers to avoid contribution volatility. Any changes to this policy require legislation, and there is a bill, Senate Bill 466, that would enact these changes. With that, on page 18, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions for our analyst? Don't see any. Thank you, sir. With that, we'll bring up our state treasurer, who I believe is with us. Yes, sir, welcome, and also our executive director, Director Novin. Welcome. Nice to see you, Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you, sir.
And to our executive director, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you. Guess I should go first. Good evening, everyone. Well, okay. Okay. Afternoon.
Mr. Treasurer, we love you, but if it's evening by the time you finish, we're going to have an issue. So.
Yeah, this is off to a great start. So let me just say good afternoon. I should have just read what they wrote, and I'm trying to freestyle here. Good afternoon, Chairman Barnes, Vice Chair Chang, and members of the Appropriations Committee. I'd like to begin by commending Jason Kramer, the budget analyst, for his excellent examination of the system. As the newly elected chairman of the Board of Trustees since Comptroller Francho left, I would like to say what an honor it has been to lead such a highly regarded panel of public servants whose sole concern is maintaining a secure pension system for the benefit of more than 413,000 members. I look forward to working with you in the years ahead to do what is best for our system and our members. It is important to note that the reforms enacted by the General Assembly in 2011 and in subsequent years continue to show positive results for the system and in fact continue to exceed earlier projections. Required employer contributions for the coming fiscal year are projected to be 18.07% of payroll, which is significantly lower than the 20.15% predicted at the time of the 2011 reforms. As of June 30th, 2022, the system funded ratio is 77.2%, 77.3% predicted, and higher than the 76.9% reported last year. The system is on track to be at 80% funded by 2026, 85% funded by 2030, and 100% funded by 2039. Right in time for me to retire, it sounds like. I would now like to turn it over to our Executive Director, Martin Novin.
Thank you, Treasurer. Good afternoon, Chairman Barnes, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's great to be in person this year. This is my first time being able to actually talk to everyone in person, so thank you for that. Thank you for Jason Kramer for the outstanding analysis. Very thorough and very accurate. We've enjoyed working with him. I'd like to just highlight a few of the data points. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time saying what Jason said. But I will say that, Treasurer Davis made a good point when he talked about the contribution rates and the fact that the employer contribution rates are lower than was anticipated at the time of the 2011 reforms. And why that's important is because everyone always asks me when you meet with groups, are we on pace? Right? Are we on pace for full funding by 2039? And of course we're on pace because our actuarial formula requires that we stay on pace. So the only way we would not be on pace would be as if that formula was changed. The problem occurs is if you don't manage things correctly, if we don't have good returns, if we don't have good smoothing of investment returns and other best practices that we have here in Maryland, if we didn't have all that, then what you have when you've got a shock to the system is you have a large increase in employer contributions. And that's what makes defined benefit plans not sustainable, is when you have great volatility in employer contributions that employers can't afford. That's when you see states taking contribution holidays or not making the full payments, and that's what weakens the defined benefit system. So the fact that we're actually doing better in terms of employer contributions than was projected at the time of the reforms is really a very important data point. In terms of the investments, that absolutely helps. And the smoothing is great, but we have to also do a good job investing our money. And we have to do a good job investing our money in up markets and down markets. And, whenever you talk to investment managers, and, unfortunately I do that more than I wish I did, everyone's always promising you they can perform in up markets and down markets. And then when you see the up markets and down markets, it's rarely the case that they perform well in both. Everyone can look like a genius when we have record returns like we had 2 years ago. And we enjoyed that as well. We came and we were able to, it was virtual, but we were able to come in front of you and brag about our record returns, and we're very proud of that. And we were proud of the fact that we could get our share of record returns on the upside with a portfolio that's designed to make sure we're protecting our participants, the system, the taxpayers, from down market conditions. And that's what we had this year. So really the time that we were going to prove our mettle, prove what we could do, was this year. So while other systems, we lost 2.97%. And, the investment team is very unhappy with that. Jason referenced it as being, a bad year, but in some ways it's a fantastic year because we controlled our losses. We only were down 2.97% when our peers were down 9%. And where retail investors in a 60-40 plan would have been down 15%. So if you think about that, that would have been $6 billion of losses if we were in a 60-40 plan, which is what some people in the press sometimes like to compare us to. Right? It's a reasonable way to show that we're adding value. If we can't do better than a retail investor at home, then what are we doing? So I can appreciate that. But that's when you have years like today, like this year, where we're $6 billion richer in our pension fund. And that's a billion with a B, because we have a professionally managed fund that's properly diversified and that guards against those risks. So I do want to make that clear, even though it's a down year, and we never like to have a down year. So just real quickly, the other things that we do to keep employer contributions level, one is the smoothing, right? So assets are smoothed. The investment returns are smoothed over 5 years, and so those record returns we had 2 years ago, those are smoothed over 5 years, and so are the modest losses this year. Those are smoothed over 5 years. And if you look at this year, those smoothings actually more than balance each other out. We're in slightly better shape this year in terms of funded status than we were last year, even though we had a modestly down year. So that smoothing works and does exactly what it's supposed to do. The other place that you see smoothing is when you talk about the actuarial, the amortization policy, which Jason mentioned. I want to just explain very briefly, and then I'll wrap up my comments, why that's important. So if you have 30 years to amortize any types of gains or losses, or any type of shocks to the system, you're in pretty good shape as a pension system, because if something happens, we can average those payments and take care of any, we'll take care of 1/30th of the problem each year if we have a 30-year amortization period. The problem now is that we're getting closer to the end of the amortization period. So if the markets lost 40%, even with some of the smoothing of returns, if we had a huge loss, there's no way to make that up with employer contributions 1 year before the end of an amortization period. So what this is doing is it's saying, here's our unfunded liability, and we're continuing on the path of making sure we're 100% funded by 2039. But if there is some shock, if there is some major event that surprises us the year before 2039 or a couple of years before 2039, we will treat those shocks separately. They will have their own amortization period, so we'll be able to smooth that out over time as well to make sure that we, we're prudent and we're continuing on the right path. And we're not pretending that everything's going to be okay and then having to come back to you when things, don't work out as nicely as we hope. So that's what that policy is about. It's important. The board's talked about it, our actuaries have talked about it. The Joint Committee has been very helpful and great to work with on that. So you'll be seeing that later this session. That's all I have for comments. We're welcome to take any questions that you have.
Okay. Thank you, Director Novin. Thank you, Treasurer. Are there any questions? Delegate Corman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions, if that's all right. The first is on the call center times that was noted in the analysis. Could you just talk a little bit about that? Obviously, that's an issue with a lot of different agencies across government. That's been frustrating for a lot of our constituents.
Yeah, happy to. And I will also take the opportunity to talk about, member services. We've done incredibly well on investments. We've done very, very well making sure our funded status and working with the actuaries, and all of you have been fantastic in supporting all these important things. Well, the one place where Maryland is behind some of our peers in other states is member services. And right now we're simply trying to keep up with the workload and trying to answer phones on time. And frankly, that's not an aspirational goal for the pension system, right? We should be reaching out to people and letting them know if they're ready to retire and engaging with them and getting them to engage with the retirement system, not just hoping that they discover our website, which is fantastic, but proactively trying to engage with participants, and that is the best practice. So right now, we're still just trying to answer phone calls, and we're trying to answer phone calls on time. And we're trying to keep, bodies in chairs, and hiring people during a very difficult time has been a real challenge. Now, we've made a huge priority on hiring. We're going to be fully staffed within the next few weeks, but then we still have some folks training. And then, a few weeks later, we're going to have more people rolling over because there's a lot of turnover in the call center. But we've made it a big priority. The additional positions will help us continue to do that because we know we're always going to have vacancies, but you can't start filling a vacancy even if you know someone's going to leave until that vacancy actually occurs unless you have some extra pins. So one extra body makes a huge difference in terms of call times. So we think we're going to see some much better numbers coming around soon. And then ultimately what I want to be doing is I want to be coming back here and telling you how well we're doing engaging with our members, how well we're doing being a trusted resource for our members so they don't have to go for financial advice elsewhere and maybe make mistakes. So we can engage with people, not just when they're new hires and they don't care about the retirement system, but proactively engage with people. And not, or when it's retirement time and we're telling them what their benefit is and they find out it's short because they took time away from the workplace, for example. We need to engage people at around 49. That's actually the magic age in terms of engaging with people to make sure that they know what their retirement benefits are and they still have time to close any retirement readiness gap before they get to retirement. So that's the kind of member services operations we want to have. So I'm hoping that yes, I'm confident we're going to solve this call center problem and the abandonment rate on the telephones, but that is really just table stakes. I think we have a lot more to do, and hopefully we'll have much better conversations about member services in the years to come.
Great. So in the short term, sounds like we should see some better numbers on the call center. So thank you. And then the other question, if it's all right, Mr. Chairman, is last year we passed Chapter 24, which is the Investment Climate Risk Fiduciary Duties legislation. Could you just talk a little about the implementation of that, how it's going?
Yes. So that's we. Staff and much of the board thought that was a fantastic bill, and it really did a great job at balancing these interests. And really what it did was we acknowledge that there's climate risk, and climate risk is investment risk, and we have to take the proper measures, right? So it would be irresponsible for us as fiduciaries to invest in coastal real estate and and ignore the fact that there's climate risk and things are changing. It does impact our portfolio. I know there's a lot of folks who think we shouldn't be considering those types of risks, and there's other people who think we should divest from things and try to save the Chesapeake. This, which we think is wonderful, and we think if we're prudent investors and we're noticing risk and we're taking advantage of opportunities for new energy, taking advantage of the new economy, we're going to benefit, and so is the Chesapeake. But I'm a little too close, as I could probably talk to you for about an hour. I'm not going to do that to you. But what I will say is we're implementing the bill. We think it's a good bill. It's a reasonable middle ground. It's a model that we've actually talked to other states about. I even spoke up at the National Association of State Retirement Administrators to talk to them about what we did as a model for other states. So I applaud that work. We're implementing that bill. We're on our third draft of changes to the investment policy because the board's taking it very seriously and wants to make sure we're getting it just right. And how do we capture the fact that we're not just making sure that we know what the risks are, we're identifying the risk, we're addressing the risk, but that we're reporting it properly, and it's governing our activities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Treasurer and Executive Director Novin, for being here. My questions are also related to the call center, specifically with regards to drop calls. Are the drop calls due to the employees or due to technology or a combination of both? Is there a way to determine that?
So the drop calls that I'm aware of are the abandoned calls, and that's due to wait times, we believe. We believe that if we're not getting to the calls soon enough, people give up, and then we have the dropped calls. So that's the concern that we have, and if we're not answering the phones quickly enough, we're not able to service our members because they're not going to sit around waiting for us to answer calls, nor should they.
Right. And with regards to the plan that's going forward, looks like, just for clarification, how many new employees is the agency looking to hire as far as to address this?
There's 4. One is going to actually, we don't even have a front desk person right now, so we have to pull someone off the phones to man the front desk. So having a front desk person will free up one more body to actually be in the chair answering calls, and then 3 more call center employees.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, a couple more questions. With regards to the call center too, are there currently an outside provider that's providing any services regarding call center?
The call center?
Yes.
No, those are all internal employees.
It's all internal? Okay, so there's no outside vendor that's providing any services? No. Okay. And do you think that with the new employees that will be ramped up and hired on, do you think that will help address as far as the response time and be able to reach out to the members and providing timely information with the phone?
We do. We think that'll give us the resources to solve this problem so we can talk about better things next year.
And the last question is with regards to other technological tools like the websites, and are there any other ways for members to reach out to the agency to help get their questions answered?
Well, the website is certainly something that we're trying to drive more and more participation to. We've been extremely successful in driving people to the website to find information. That's been helpful. We're continuing to enhance the website, and we're also trying to do more automation in other ways, in the way that employers interact with us, not just our members. And the more we can get people to interact with us in those manners, that'll free up resources to better serve our members and to put more resources towards things like the call center as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Newman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Dr. Watson, were you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to see our treasurer here and my friends at the State Retirement Agency. So my question is a little bit different. It's more focused on our use of diverse asset managers. We talk about this often. I just want to know if you could speak a little bit to, one, our current usage of diverse asset managers as we are managing these public funds, and the pipeline. I know we talked in the past about building a pipeline of diverse applicants who can come into the State Retirement Agency and learn how to manage these funds and help build out the larger ecosystem of diverse asset managers. Thank you.
The manager called for a pinch hitter, so I'm Andrew Palmer. I'm the Chief Investment Officer for the system, and happy to answer the question about our efforts on diverse managers. I think we provide a report to the governor's office every year, and that report showed that we had about 17% of our assets managed by diverse managers, of assets that we have with managers, and that's down a little bit, and that's from about 21% a few years ago, and that's because we've brought some assets in-house. So that's part of the reason for that. And so we have a ongoing program for evaluating managers. My staff and I have been looked. I think we've engaged with a large number of managers. We're starting to keep track of managers that we talk about, and to Delegate Corman's question, we're trying to keep track of how many managers and products we look at that are managed by diverse managers or are invested in the transition for climate change. So we're trying to do a better job of keeping track of those things and have a pretty good pipeline of those things. We've made a number of investments in the last year with additional diverse managers with new ones.
Thank you, because I know that as we're bringing more of those assets in-house, obviously that should save the taxpayer money and fees and whatnot that we would be giving to these managers. I just appreciate your special attention to making sure we're still building a bench of applicants coming out of our historically black colleges and universities so that they're not missing the opportunity to go into the industry. It's very important to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. See any other questions? So great to see all of you. Mr. Treasurer, Mr. Director, Mr. Palmer. Have a great day.
Mr. Chairman, keep an eye on those supplemental guys. You want to watch there.
Oh, yeah, we got them next, so you know. With that, we'll invite Mr. Kramer back for Maryland Supplemental Retirement.
Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. I'll now be presenting the analysis for the Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plans. MSRP provides employees with 4 supplemental retirement plan options and funds its operations with a fee on member accounts. As you can see here on page 1, MSRP's fiscal 2024 allowance of $2.3 million in special funds is a slight increase from fiscal 2023. Exhibit 1 on page 2 shows agency spending in the fiscal 2024 allowance. As you can see, 3/4 of spending is for personnel, with the other costs mostly for contractual services and office rent. Exhibit 3 on page 5 shows the plan's expenses and revenues. Participant fees are 50 cents per month and 0.11% of assets. That fee was reduced in February 2022. In addition, there's a 3-month fee holiday at the end of 2022. The reason for this is shown here in Exhibit 3 is that MSRP had a fund balance of over $1 million, which is about 54% of expenses. The agency target is 25% of expenses. MSRP estimates a closing balance of 35% of expenses in fiscal 2023. Turning next to page 6, Exhibit 4 shows plan performance as compared to benchmarks. MSRP plans missed their benchmark only slightly in the most recent 1-year period, but have exceeded benchmarks across other longer time periods. Exhibit 5 on page 7 shows membership and contribution levels. For many years, the membership rate and contribution rate have been very stable. However, in fiscal 2022, there was a nearly 14% drop in the number of members contributing to their supplemental plans. MSRP attributes this in part to federal legislation that expanded the eligible reasons for withdrawing from a retirement account, which can have the added knock-on effect of members ending their contributions. DLS has asked MSRP to comment on the drop in membership and contributors. One other note, SB 6 would require MSRP to automatically enroll employees in a supplemental retirement plan. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you for the presentation. Any questions for our analyst? Don't see any. Thank you, sir. All right, we'll bring the agency up. Director Butler Bell, I think, is with us. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, for the record, my name is Rhonda Bell, Executive Director of Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plans. Also for the record, although he just left, Treasurer Davis is a trustee on my board as well, for the record. So
We hear you.
we are very happy to be here. We appreciate the opportunity to come before you today to discuss our budget and also the great work we are doing on behalf of state employees. With me today is Deborah Roberts, who is our Deputy Executive Director and CFO. We do appreciate the DLS analysis and Mr. Kramer's analysis, and we appreciate the fact that they have concurred with the governor's allowance. So with that, we are here, happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, any questions? Don't see any. Thanks for your great work.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good day. All right, we'll turn to our Chesapeake Bay overview. Andrew Gray is our analyst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jump right to page 5 of the analysis, looking at the overarching goal for the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, or total maximum daily load. So as it's been described, the total maximum daily load, sort of the overall diet we want to get to for nutrient and sediment pollution to the bay. That will help with the living resources and meeting water quality goals. The To get there, we're hoping to get there by 2025, although as we'll discuss, it doesn't look like that's going to happen necessarily. We have to extend that timeline. To get there, we have watershed implementation plans that each of the states have created, established, and that's basically your kind of the plan to get to the diet of the total maximum daily load. Then you have your 2-year milestones for the check-ins, making sure that you're actually getting where you want to go, making sure that we're actually making the progress that we're attempting to make. I like this exhibit on page 9, exhibit 2, shows the big picture. It's a little dated in terms of the actual data supporting it, but not much has changed. So in terms of the big picture on the far left, green is agriculture. So that's the major loading that's going on in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. That's what we're kind of the non-point source part of the work being done for Chesapeake Bay restoration. So a lot of the work is being done there. A lot of the work still to be done. In the middle is the nitrogen progress in terms of how far we've gotten. So you can see in the the land river segments that have the really dark color, that's where we've actually met or exceeded our goals. We haven't really done that in a lot of places, unfortunately. A lot of work still to be done. And on the far right shows the remaining reductions in nitrogen. And as you can see, it sort of swings from the Shenandoah Valley up into the Lancaster region of Pennsylvania, then down onto kind of the eastern shore. This is a lot of work around urban areas with the wastewater treatment plants, ex-urban areas with the septic systems, and then the rural areas with the most difficult in some ways, the agricultural non-point source pollution. In terms of Maryland's progress, this is showing it by sector: agriculture, wastewater, developed, natural. Developed being the urban sector, the stormwater. And what you're seeing here is that we had a steady trend between 2009 and 2020 in terms of reductions. 2021 is actually an anomaly, primarily due to 2 factors: the Back River and Patapsco wastewater treatment plant challenges, failures that have occurred, and also new model changes for the agriculture sector, which are basically not showing as much progress due to changes in the looks of the amount of fertilizer, the best management practice progress, and also livestock levels as well. What you're seeing is that the goal, our WIP 2025 WIP goal official, is 44.7 million pounds of nitrogen, and we're around 50.7 million pounds. So there's a lot more work to be done. That's a really kind of ambitious goal. It includes climate change components as well, because not only are we looking at the existing considerations, also the changing regime of rainfall in the state as well. So it's an additional challenge. We've actually committed to going further than we need to in order to address that climate change, but it looks like we might not be able to get to that point either. What we're seeing is that we have an 11.9% reduction needed between now and 2025, and the big part of that work is going to have to come from the agriculture sector. You see on the far right the 19.2% reduction that's going to occur. So a lot of work still to be done in the agriculture sector. We need to kind of reverse where we are with the wastewater sector, but as soon as we kind of get those 2 major wastewater treatment plants on board, then we should be in fairly good shape for the time being. Long term, it's stormwater, because we're going to be developing as a state. Wastewater treatment plants will be tapped out in terms of their ability, technology-wise, and just because of additional people coming onto them. And therefore, it'll be kind of a long-term game of very expensive stormwater solutions, with some work in the agriculture sector, obviously, kind of the rural areas. In terms of the progress by basin, it's really kind of simple point here. If you look in the far right, the most work that needs to be done between 2021 and 2025 looks like it's the western shore. So that would be kind of an anomaly based, I think, on just the 1-year issues with the 2 major wastewater treatment plants. The eastern shore, I think, is probably going to be doing a lot more work going forward, and that's a lot of the agriculture. And if the agencies want to comment on the Chop Tank watershed in particular, it has been singled out as having some challenges in terms of getting where we want to go. In terms of the overall progress, basically, things aren't looking great. The major reason here is not Delaware, which is the top amount of percent reduction that needs to occur going forward. They're a very small absolute amount. Not quite sure why they have the reductions needed, the higher percent right now. It's just below that. It's Pennsylvania. It's the big game. Pennsylvania is very agricultural and has had a lot of challenges in terms of getting its progress to where it needs to be. We'll talk more about that a little bit later, but that looks like the reason, at least probably the major reason why we're not going to get to the 2025 deadline. Even Maryland's going to have challenges on its own as well. In terms of 5 issues to be discussed here, it's time for an evaluation of where we are. We need to kind of check in to see kind of why we are where we are and where we need to go. 2025 doesn't look like it's going to happen. So there's something called the Comprehensive Evaluation of System Response by the Science and Technical Advisory Committee of the Chesapeake Bay Programs, looking at why we are where we are. Some of the things that they're sort of talking about, not an official report yet, but some information that came out of Chesapeake Bay Commission November 2022 meeting, is that a lot more needs to be done. So this is challenging. It's a very challenging work in terms of making those reductions. We're not actually seeing or understanding why there's a difference between our monitoring results and some of our modeled reductions. The non-point source pollution controls are insufficient. This is the kind of need potentially for spatial targeting. It's not just taking advantage of who wants to come to you for funding to do reductions, best management practices. It may require us to go out and say, hey, we would like to work with you because we can get the most bang from the buck for our buck with you on your particular land. And then there's also some good signs as well. We are seeing some response in terms of the living resources recovery in areas where we're seeing reductions in nutrients and sediment. So there are positive signs overall, but more work needs to be done. Spatial targeting seems like it's going to be a big part of this. Department of Legislative Services recommends the administration comment on the implications of the comprehensive evaluation of system response, kind of the initial findings at least, in particular how spatial targeting could improve non-point source pollution controls. Then on page 22, second issue, this is the overall Chesapeake Bay restoration funding. Talk about it at two scales, the overall big picture, and then also the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund, which is kind of a more micro look at funding going forward. On page 23, Exhibit 9 shows you the big picture in terms of how much money is being provided. It's a tremendous amount of money, $1 billion, and the allowance for fiscal 2024 is dedicated, at least 50% of the programs, 50% of the work of each of these programs is kind of related to the Bay. So that's a tremendous amount of money. The difference between 23 and fiscal 24 is around $150.4 million. Majority of this is actually for purple line activities. Obviously, getting people off the road means there's less air emissions, that then kind of nitrogen oxides that get into the Bay. Also, you have an increase around $42.9 million for program Open Space, Rural Legacy, and MALF, this Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation. This is largely due to repayment funding that's coming into those programs, as well as a large overattainment from fiscal 22 that's allowed for enhancement in a sense for fiscal 24. GNR is around a $9.8 million increase, largely due to the increase in funding for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund. A lot of money that was provided in general funds as deficiencies still available, and we are seeing some recovery in the short-term vehicle rental tax as well. And then MDA has around $2 million additional I can kind of point out to you here for funding for the Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program. The 2010 Trust Fund, if you look on page 26, large increases $8 million for the competitive grant program in the lower right-hand corner. The Tree Solutions Now Act provides $2.5 million into the fund for the work of that legislation. There's around $1.2 million for adaptive management and maintenance, which is largely due to the Conservation Finance Act from last year. The recommendation here is to adopt committee narrative requesting the administration continue to publish the Chesapeake Bay restoration data, and for administrative purposes, it will occur in the Department of Natural Resources operating budget analysis, and also recommends budget bill language be added to require the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund to be information be submitted with the budget. All right, recommendation or issue number 3 concerns the historical and projected Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. This is a report that is requested annually. There's actually language attached to this analysis for that purpose as well. That's on page 27. 3 main things just kind of point out wastewater treatment plants, as we talked about, some challenges with the 2 majors. But once you get those back on board, the question is really, do we have the staffing and the preventative maintenance for all of our plants, our 67 majors and the minors as well, to make sure that our investment, our tremendous investment, over $1 billion, is safeguarded, to make sure that those plants are performing the way we want them to perform. We don't want to see any more Patapsco or Back River failures the way we have. So the Maryland Department of the Environment has testified that they're working on a couple things to actually address that situation. It involves staff meetings between the Maryland Department of the Environment and Maryland Environmental Service and ways to improve operations, the inclusion of an engineering report and new discharge permits to ensure that facilities are being run effectively. It's an excellent requirement. So anytime they come in for a new permit, somebody goes out and actually checks the plant to make sure it's working well. And an early warning monitoring system based on, I think it's quarterly, not necessarily continuous flow data, that would allow then for kind of an update on kind of how we're doing with each plant. For the agriculture sector, it's a challenge, largely non-point source pollution. Targeting is going to be a big consideration here. And some of the work also of the 24 soil conservation districts. So 53 field positions were added a couple of years ago. Maryland Department of Agriculture is having a challenge actually filling those positions due to, I guess, obviously you staff up and then people find more lucrative positions elsewhere, and so they're moving out. But they're working on getting those positions filled. And then once you have those positions filled, hopefully you'll have a pipeline where those soil conservation district personnel can go out, they can do the soil and water quality conservation plans on farms. So they basically go out to the farm and find out what needs to be done. Then they tell the farmer, okay, here's your plan, here's the best management practices that can help you with your operations. Then the soil conservation districts can work with those farmers to get those best management practices implemented on the farms. And then hopefully we get those nitrogen reductions and phosphorus and sediment reductions. And then we can obviously get further along towards our agricultural goals. And then for stormwater, not talked about a lot, but as noted, this is going to be a long-term problem because of the development, obviously kind of change of agricultural land to developed land, and just the kind of high costs, the fact that it's there's very limited land to do these stormwater projects on. So that's another challenge. They have to really kind of reach out to the private sector to try to look to see if there are people interested in doing that work. And we've tried things in the past. The legislature looked at an impervious surface fee, also called the rain tax. It didn't work out. The Prince George's County and Corvia Solutions public-private partnership is another possibility. It's in place right now, but I don't think they still have kind of met kind of their overall goals for making sure that the public-private partnership kind of enhance their program. GLS recommends that the administration comments on its plans for requiring wastewater treatment plant engineering reports with permit renewals and its early warning system, whether the agricultural sector will adopt targeting to reduce net point source pollution, what the next step is for stormwater load reductions. GLS also recommends that language be added similarly provided for in previous years. On page 29 is the Conowingo WIP relicensing and sediment study issue. So the Conowingo Dam, much talked about in terms of the loads that are associated with it. Obviously, it's become to a dynamic equilibrium. So what's happening is that you have the sediment trapped with the phosphorus behind the dam. And so then when you have large scour events, that sediment with the phosphorus comes into the Chesapeake Bay. Then you also just have the nitrogen flowing with, it's just water soluble, it's just flowing right over the dam into the Chesapeake Bay itself. So Conowingo Dam Watershed Implementation Plan, the states have worked this out, kind of a dynamic rolling situation in terms of how they're going to be able to kind of phased approach in terms of addressing that. 6.75 million pounds of nitrogen per year. Total annualized cost is still somewhere between $53 and $253 million to address that loading. Maryland's fiscal 23 budget did include $25 million for that purpose, and there has been a Board of Public Works item. We'll talk about a little bit further about that. The Conowingo Dam Watershed Implementation Plan had a couple of different components. The two remaining that I think are still out there, the system for tracking, verifying, reporting, best management practice implementation, and also the financing strategy as well. Determine whose share is going to pay for what part of this Conowingo WIP. Right now, Maryland's once again ponied up $25 million, but to my knowledge, no other states have necessarily committed to that funding. So there was the Board of Public Works agenda item. There was a couple of questions, at least in my mind, about what that item provided for. They talked about a memorandum of understanding with the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. So the commission will now then be doing pay for success, best management practice, kind of RFP going forward to actually get those reductions. But we haven't seen the memorandum. The Susquehanna River Commission, the Basin Commission press release indicates that the memorandum has been signed. We haven't seen it. And it was a little bit unclear in the Board of Public Works item whether we consider, the Maryland considers that to be signed. There was a state clearinghouse review, hadn't been necessarily completed before the Board of Public Works item, but it looks like there's just going to be kind of a Maryland Historical Trust review of projects component. So it doesn't look like there are any major concerns there. We talked a little bit about the request for proposals already, and then finally the credit for projects. Obviously, we want to make sure we get credit for the work we're doing. So we want to make sure that that process is in place to make sure that Maryland is addressing the 0.18 million pounds it's part of the Conowingo WIP. All right, so the second component for the Conowingo Dam is the relicensing. We had an agreement with Exelon that allowed for $200 million in environmental projects and operational enhancements. On December 20th, 2022, U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit ordered that license to be vacated. So the basic idea seems to be that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission really had to act on two particular circumstances, where a state is granted a water quality certification or where a state has waived its authority or refused to act. Maryland had actually done something, had actually had in 2018 and issued a water quality certification. There was a lot of blowback from Exelon, and then we went into this side agreement. So the court found that that actually was not legitimate. We have to actually go back to either that original water quality certification, approve it, go forward with it, FERC has to either approve it or deny it, and try to go for a new water quality certification. But they basically sort of nullified this idea of having this side agreement. So the big question now is, what happens to that $200 million that we were pledged over 50 years that we worked out with Exelon? Finally, there's a sediment study that's being conducted and basically implemented by the Maryland Environmental Service. They've got a report in that kind of indicates that there are possibilities for using the sediment behind the dam, but it really does not appear to be all that effective. There's transport costs, it's very difficult to kind of remove the water, and it's really unclear whether this, the material is suitable for the projects that are being considered, whether there be any money to be made from this, or whether we'd be putting in more money than we'd be getting out of it. DLS recommends the administration comment on the likelihood that Chesapeake partners will contribute funding to the Conowingo Dam Watershed Implementation Plan, the details of the memorandum with the commission, the request for proposals, and the crediting of nutrient reduction by projects. Also, the status of Conowingo Dam relicensing, the settlement agreement with Exelon, given the recent court order, and the plan for Conowingo Dam reservoir dredging and beneficial reuse of sediment. Issue 5 on page 33 concerns the lawsuits filed against the Environmental Protection Agency. So Maryland and a number of other states were concerned about the progress, filed lawsuits in September 10, 2020 to basically require the EPA to do its work in terms of enforcing the total maximum daily load and the work being done by the watershed implementation plans. To kind of add to the concerns here, Pennsylvania has submitted its amendment to its Phase 3 watershed implementation plan, indicating that basically it's not going to get there. It's only going to get to 72% of the nitrogen target. It's going to fall 9.3 million pounds shy of where it needs to be. So the question is now, what happens with this lawsuit? Does Maryland settle in some way? Are there any kind of implications for Pennsylvania? Therefore, DLS recommends that the agency comment on that as well. On page 34, the one recommended action, this is for that annual report with a restriction of funding to request that report to be submitted by December 1, 2023. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gray, for the great presentation and analysis. Any questions for our analyst? Delegate Grist.
Chairman, I'm just looking, it looks like the target with the Conowingo Dam, I think it said 6 million pounds of nitrogen was the target there, and I'm looking up at this graph where it's talking about the total phosphorus load that goes into the bay. And I think we're looking at it between Pennsylvania and New York, and those are the two states that we have to look at because every bit of their nitrogen and phosphorus, it crosses over the Conowingo Dam. It doesn't go around the dam, so it has to go over. And we're looking at it, if you add Pennsylvania and New York, it looks like it's about 120 million pounds on that chart. I think it was exhibit 3 maybe. See, I'm trying to.
So I would defer.
It looks like there's a big difference in those two numbers.
Right, so why is there a WIP, the regular WIP for those states that somehow doesn't account for that phosphorus and nitrogen in the Conowingo Dam? How do you parcel out the Conowingo Dam WIP from that larger component? Is that the question?
Well, no, I'm just wondering, because the target is 6 million pounds, and it looks like the, on Exhibit 4, Maryland nitrogen pollution loads, oops, I'm sorry, no, not that one. It's the one that broke it down by state.
Okay, so Exhibit 5 on page 20, or 15?
Yeah, I think that's the one.
Oh, I'm sorry, Exhibit 6 on page 17.
That's correct, that's the one, exactly. So if you look at 2021, that's the most recent number here. So Pennsylvania is 104 million pounds of nitrogen, and New York is 12.6 million pounds. So we're looking at, what, 118 million pounds between the two, and the target, when I read further down, was 6 million pounds. So I'm wondering,
And
I
It's
mean,
over and
that's the elephant in the room right now is New York and Pennsylvania and the
So
amount
it's
that's.
over and above it. So
Right.
the Conowingo Dam WIP would be over and above what you're seeing in this exhibit on Exhibit 6.
Right.
So yeah, you're exactly right. Pennsylvania is already struggling. It's submitted a plan that's insufficient to meet the goal for the regular component. So yeah, it's a big question.
Right.
So one component, potentially the agencies can speak to this more, is that Maryland is considering doing some reductions up in Pennsylvania as part of its work to meet the WIP.
Right.
That helps us because obviously everything comes eventually to the dam and then into the bay.
Right.
So we are looking to use some of that 25 million, at least what it looked like from the Board of Public Works supporting documents in the Conowingo, I think it was a creek watershed, to do some work up there. So that'll help in a minor way. But certainly, yes, that's a huge challenge. It's over and above what they have to do for the regular WIP. And yeah, the question remains, how is that going to work?
Right. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not focusing, most of our attention on agriculture right now, because they have done an awful lot. In fact, there's been a lot of trial and error over the last, 15 or 20 years with using mulching, using straw, and using all sorts of things to be able to filter that stormwater before it goes into our creeks and rivers. And some of it has worked a little, some of it's failed, but they've been trying. And also with the nutrient management plans, they know exactly how much they're putting into the soil. And with the cost of fertilizer now, they're certainly not going over. I can guarantee you that. They're going to go up to the amount that they absolutely need in order to be able to get by, in order to leverage their costs. So I just want to make sure, and then phosphorus is less an issue in ag because, as you know, phosphorus binds more to the soil than nitrogen does. So nitrogen's the big issue, when it comes to agriculture, more so than phosphorus. But it's the Conowingo Dam that's the issue right now. That's where we're going to make the biggest improvement on the Chesapeake Bay. And it just seems like we've been dragging our feet for the last, quarter century. To get that clean. I know there's not a clear-cut answer, but at some point, if we really truly want to do something, that's going to clean the bay, that's the answer. There's no question about that. And the numbers are right here. I mean, it's showing on Exhibit 6. Yeah.
Well, there's an old joke about the solution to the bay is just busing everybody out to the Midwest. But yeah, I think that agriculture in Pennsylvania is absolutely key to the work going forward. And trying to work with Pennsylvania, I mean, the Environmental Protection Agency, maybe, having some teeth in terms of changing permitting up there, redirecting federal money if they're not using it in the most effective way. Certainly the Conowingo is a component of all this, but I mean, largely from what I see, it's agriculture in Pennsylvania is going to make the deal.
Good question. Thank you, Delegate. Any other questions for our analyst? Delegate Watson.
Chair, you mentioned the storm water fee didn't work out. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, that's more in the political realm, really, but I guess the impervious surface fee was a very interesting idea. The idea of, in a sense, making development more expensive in a sprawl sense. If you have more condensed development, there'd be less impervious area, and you would incentivize that type of development and disincentivize sprawl development where there's more impervious surface area generated. That was very controversial in terms of its implementation, and so it was never implemented as a revenue source and a potential kind of regulatory tool to try to help manage how development occurs and then the impacts that it causes for Chesapeake Bay restoration purposes.
Okay, so we have a stormwater management fee in my county, and we collect quite a bit of money through it, and it pays for stormwater management projects. Are you just saying that that money doesn't come to the state?
No, so there was a separate fee considered back a number of years ago now.
Well, you reference it in your report as the rain tax.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
Correct.
So we did implement that in Howard County. Are you saying that
I'm sorry.
it didn't work out because the money doesn't come to the state?
No,
or-
the statewide version of that didn't work
Okay.
out. I'm sorry. Any individual county's work on that sense, I am not speaking to that at all. That is a great idea. but the statewide version of the impervious
So
surface.
so the state does not get any portion of stormwater fees that local jurisdictions may charge?
I believe that is correct. I can defer the agency on that, but back in the
Okay.
day,
We
there was
can
a
ask the
potential.
agency. I don't want to put you on the spot. I just was confused by your
So yeah,
comments.
the statewide impervious surface fee that was considered a number of years ago, that did not pass. Individual jurisdictions have implemented certain ideas along those lines, but that was not passed as a statewide initiative.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Gray? Well, as always, a great presentation, very thorough. We appreciate you. We have a number of, I think we have about half the administration with us today. So we'll welcome some of these for the first times: Acting Secretary Addix, Acting Secretary Flora, Acting Secretary Kurtz, and Acting Secretary McElwain. Welcome, come on up. Great to see you all, and for those here for the first time, welcome to the Appropriations Committee. Congratulations to you all.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll get started. Good to see
Welcome,
you
nice to see
again.
you.
Yes, thank you all for having us again in front of you, this time to talk about Chesapeake Bay budget outlook. I also want to thank the DLS analyst, Andrew Gray, who did, in my opinion, in our opinion, a really good job at digging into the report and coming up with the thorough questions that we agree should be addressed, because they were really important. I'll start by saying that our goals, the Chesapeake Bay restoration goals, align with the Moore administration's priorities. It's a partnership. We can't do this alone, which is why delighted to have my colleagues here, the secretaries, and together we are, the success of the Chesapeake Bay is because of this partnership that we have. It's the cabinet agencies, the local governments, federal governments, and many more. So my job, and I've heard just sitting here today, there's a lot of issues about staffing and resources, and what do we do to ensure that we are really addressing the issues of pollution. And so my job is to ensure that we have staffing and funding and resources to ensure that we can do our jobs to restore the health and resilience of the Chesapeake Bay. That's my top priority. I've been saying that since I started 18 days ago, and I'm not counting. I just wanted to really highlight the fact that when we do have the correct and the more and the efficient resources, that is going to allow us to issue science-based and timely permits to ensure that we are effective in oversight and compliance and enforcement. And so, again, that's how we keep the water clean and deploy green infrastructure to our communities and keeping our economy strong. And of course, restoring the environment. So with that, I am going to pass it on to you, Secretary-designee Addix, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thanks for welcoming us here. You should invite the rest of the cabinet next time as well. Couple of things about agriculture with relation to the Chesapeake Bay. First of all, Maryland agriculture leads the way in the Bay watershed in terms of the practices and the impact that we have on our Bay. It's critically important, though, to understand that we also have the challenge of our agriculture being within one of the most desirable, developable areas in the country. And so one of the keys to making sure that our farmers are doing the right thing and doing the best things is to make sure that they're profitable. We have to make sure they're profitable. So you'll hear over the next few years plans that our department has to give farmers the tools so that they themselves can become more profitable, and they don't necessarily need all of our programs to do the right things, quote unquote, for the Bay. Nutrient management compliance has a huge impact on all the numbers you heard the analyst discuss with regards to the Bay and water quality progress. I will note, as the analyst did say, when you look at that comparison of the maps and you saw all the green where there's the agriculture impact, most of that green is not in our state. Most of that green is north of us, north of the border. And so, I would urge you as you and your colleagues are thinking about new programs and new ways that we can encourage farmers to do things and change their practices, that, at some point, we need to direct our attention to having conversations to the north to make sure that there is similar compliance and that their ideals are aimed in the same direction as our ideals. And that can be difficult cross-border, but I think that's very important since most of the impact is coming from out of state. The volunteer approach that we've taken over the years has worked very, very well, of encouraging farmers to take advantage of programs that come from us, from the USDA, from the EPA, and engage in practices that do good by the Bay. Something that we've learned over the years is that when we work with farmers to encourage them voluntarily to take advantage of these programs and adjust their practices that sometimes they've been using for 6 generations, but to adjust their practices, there's a term of that program, 1 or 2 years, we do compliance checks. But when we come back a couple of years later, after they've been through and done with the program, they're not receiving the incentives or the money anymore, 70% are still engaging in those practices that do good by the Bay. And so if we can, it's almost like education and retraining. If we can give our farmers the tools, give our farmers access to greater profitability, then they're going to do the right thing by all of our eyes and all of our perceptions. The last thing I'll say is that we are focusing within the agency all of our programs and our technical tools toward this. It's so critically important that our farmers are given the right tools and given the resources to learn and train. And some of those resources, of course, end up being through cost share programs and grants. But again, the rewards are incredible going forward. So thank you very much, and we'll stick around for questions. Turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Josh Kurtz from DNR.
Good afternoon, Chair Barnes, Vice Chair Chang, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Josh Kurtz, the Secretary Designee for the Department of Natural Resources. I want to touch on a few of the ways that the department plays a role in the Bay restoration, starting with science. The department administers our water quality monitoring permit to help us look at the real-time impacts of the work that we're doing, which, as we know, is critically important to make sure that we're properly and most efficiently expending our money, and making sure that we're doing projects in places that not only have the greatest impact, but we can maximize additional ecosystem services. At the department, we're thinking about the living resources, the opportunities for ecotourism, the economic viability of many of our important constituencies and communities. Starts with science. The next is we think about some of the goals outside of just the different sectors that we're talking about with pollution. We work on restoration programs that cross-cut many of these sectors and prevent pollution from getting into the water, as well as things like oyster and mussel restoration that help filter the water once there is pollution in there. We also administer some of the key and largest funding sources for these programs, including the trust fund, which was mentioned here, the 2010 trust fund, the program Open Space, as well for land protection and several others. I think a lot of what I want to talk about will probably answer some of these questions. So if it's all right with you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to jump into question number 1. So we look at the CESAR report, as we're kind of calling it internally, the Chesapeake Bay, or the Comprehensive Evaluation of System Response. We're really excited about this because, as I said, we really rely on the science to make good and adaptive management decisions. We don't have the report, but as you've heard, there have been a few preliminary outcomes that we've heard about, and are all things that we're excited to advance at the department, especially when we think about targeting and innovation and how we spend the funding. We've got some new tools in the toolbox, including the Conservation Finance Act, which is going to allow us to bring more private resources to bear to improve the waterways and our natural habitats for the Bay. So we're excited for that. We're committed to being guided by the science, and we're looking forward to the CESAR report so we can get even further into the detail from that and help us make adaptive management decisions. Also, just a point, and was mentioned, the impacts from climate change are growing and making it more difficult. We think this report is going to be critical in helping us better understand how we can more effectively manage that. Moving on to the second question that was raised. We concur with the recommendation, and we'll continue to publish the restoration data in the budget book. And I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Secretary Designee Addicks, for the next question.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary Designee. And Mr. Chairman, just on this third question, I would say that rather than MDA focusing and retargeting its programs towards certain segments of the industry or certain geographic regions, we are instead retargeting our programs to better focus and to better support. And so we're gussying up our technical assistance. We're basically re-aiming and redesignating our efforts to make sure that we, just based on new science and new research, as the delegate pointed out, we try things, we target, we learn, because we are ahead. And we're the ones that are doing this. There are not other agricultural state agencies across the country that are leaning into this type of research and education and kind of performance evaluations. And so as we learn what we learn, we retarget our programs to make sure that we are increasing as we go. Of course, if there are hot points and target sources that we need to look at, we'll obviously focus on those, but ours is more of a recalibrating, continuing to recalibrate the programs to make sure they're meeting the needs of farmers and the communities and the Bay. I turn it over to Secretary Designee McElwain.
Thank you. So I'll answer these specific questions that were asked of my agency, and I'm just going to give some highlights because we did issue a full report, but I thought I'd cover just quickly. So for the reporting language part of question 3, we do plan to submit that or provide that in our 2023 JCR report. In regards to wastewater, as I stated in my opening remarks, it's critical that we make sure that local governments have the resources that they need for assistance, and to make sure that they have money to upgrade and have the proper funding to operate those wastewater treatment plants. So that is a goal, that's a focus, it's important. And again, our focus is on compliance and enforcement mechanisms when it's necessary. And so some of the initiatives that we're working on that I'd like to share today, just a few. We are requiring plant engineering evaluations. We are also issuing what we call facility improvement plans, and we're issuing those to plants who've been consistently not in compliance for the past, when they had their previous permits. So we're using that plan to address that. We're also increasing monitoring to evaluate facilities, the progress of facilities. Also, the wastewater early warning system is a screening of monthly data from the discharge monitoring report. So we use that data to identify wastewater treatment plants that are not operating at the expected levels. Also, we use the statistics from the Statistics Quarterly, and then we send that information to the plants that are off track, and we kind of call it like an alert letter, just to kind of alert them that, this is happening. And we, at that same time, we do offer assistance. So we don't just send a letter and they're on their own. We're here to help. And we're planning to send those letters out in June 23, in a couple of months. So you'll also notice in the response document that we provided that we are making good progress issuing stormwater permits. And it's helping us in terms of increasing our restoration pace. And we plan to do that moving forward. We plan to continue to incentivize green infrastructure solutions like trees and wetlands for local stormwater and flooding challenges. And we will also, as I've said before, stay focused on our stormwater permit oversight role that we have. Now, so for question number 4 on Conowingo, New York, Pennsylvania, and SRBC are already contributing funding to the Conowingo WIP implementation. Pennsylvania, they're also working to create a Conowingo funding set-aside, and they're going to use, they have the Clean Water Procurement Program. They're using that to do that. We have in Maryland, as it was stated earlier in detail, we've contributed $25 million to pay for pollution reductions as well. So in regards to the Conowingo settlement agreement, it's still in effect. So even though the FERC license that was talked about today and what the courts did to overturn it, today it still remains in effect. And quality certification waiver have been invalidated, however, because of that, the license. So we're in negotiations with Conowingo. I can't talk about it today, but it's ongoing. We're doing what we can to get to resolution on that. In terms of question number 5, we can't comment on that either because it's pending litigation, and we're still waiting on EPA's latest position. But I will say this, that litigation is moving in a good direction. I've had conversations with EPA, and that's all I can say. It's moving along in a good direction. And finally, for question number 6, we will continue to provide the reports and data by December 1st. That's our commitment. We plan to do that. So I am respectfully asking that there's reconsideration of the recommendation to hold $1 million that's associated to the report submittal. That's my ask, so please consider that. Thank you.
All right. Well, all the secretaries with us, thank you so much for your responses. We appreciate you addressing the questions that were asked. Madam Secretary, I know you know some folks over at EPA, so hopefully you can, when you can share some answers, that would be great.
Yeah.
When you get them, if you can follow up with us on some of those issues you weren't able to address. Any questions for our acting secretaries? Delegate McComas.
It's not necessarily a question, but we have a problem up in Hartford County, which is the Perryman Peninsula. And the concern is that a third of the county's aquifers are under the Perryman Peninsula. It's the headwaters of the bay, so there's planned for a major storage units there on the property, warehouses, excuse me. And so there'll be a lot of impervious surface. There's only one way in, one way out, and it had some of the best farmland around. And unfortunately, it's been upzoned for the development of the warehouses, which like we don't need anymore, and they're not high-paying jobs. But the other problem is that the landowners have a right to do that. So we're trying to look at if there another way to cut a deal where the landowners are happy and the folks that spent a lot of money having houses face the water at the headwaters of the bay, their houses don't depreciate because of warehouses behind them. So anyway, it's a mess. So if you guys have any clever ideas, please let me know.
Yep, no problem. I'm sure they'll get back to you, Delegate, on those questions, and
Yes.
if you're not prepared today, no problem. Delegate Solomon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to see you all. Congratulations on your new roles, those who haven't been here before. Just kind of a general question, because I feel like the one person we are missing is the new Secretary of Transportation, and just kind of curious, as you all are coming into this new role, especially with this new administration and the priority of the governor and the lieutenant governor, how much coordination is it going to be from the Bay cabinet with MDOT? Because obviously so many of the projects that they're going to be pursuing have a huge impact on the numbers that we're seeing here.
I'll just say that partnership is critical. I know I'm planning to really have a relationship and partnership with the Secretary of MDOT because I need that partnership to push a lot of goals forward in MDE. I don't know if you all would like to address that as well.
MDOT also has a unique responsibility or potential role to play in the restoration in that as we move away and move towards electric vehicles, we'll be reducing some of the nitrogen deposition. So some interesting kind of innovative solutions for us to reduce some of the nitrogen within coming into the Bay watershed. And then obviously working with them as they, they own a lot of property to make sure that there's, positive benefits to our living resources.
I think we're all really excited for that continued partnership, so thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Don't see any other questions, so thank you all for being with us. Congratulations again. I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I think we are adjourned. Thank you, committee. Have a good weekend.
How are you? Thank you. Oh, yeah, of course.